Everybody, please grab your food. We are in for a very exciting evening here. And we are going to begin introducing tonight Dr. Larry Niles. And you know you're in trouble delivering an introduction to somebody when you find that the best brief biography that there is available online is so comprehensive that it's a challenge just to edit that down sufficiently for a time like this. So I'm going to make a go at it. And in 2017, Penn State gave an Outstanding Alumni Award to Dr. Niles, who has really been Mr. Wildlife New Jersey. And I really like their bio of him, and so I'm going to try to deliver to you a bit of that. So he got his undergraduate and master's degrees at Penn State, where he got that award, and then did his dissertation a couple of decades later at Rutgers on migratory raptors. And that work has informed a lot of what's happened in New Jersey since, because among other things, he co-wrote with Larry Torek of the DEP the section on how to assess migratory raptors and protecting enhanced resource value wetlands. And you may remember about wetlands from Sue Lockwood's talk about that at the beginning of our lecture series this academic year. Well, in 1982, Larry moved from Georgia to New Jersey and has been at it ever since, promoting wildlife and shorebirds, not only in New Jersey, but really for their study and conservation throughout the world. So in 1992, he was promoted to the head of the state Endangered and Non-Game Species Program in the DEP and led that program until his retirement in 2006. During that time, he doubled the Endangered and Non-Game Species Program budget and developed a nonprofit, the Conserve Wildlife Foundation of New Jersey, which raised funds to support its projects. And you probably, if you know about Conserve Wildlife Foundation or else, you know it from all the license plates that are around and that help to fund the Conserve Wildlife Foundation. And a first initiative was called the Landscape Map. And this is a project that allows us to look throughout the state to see what species are present and to use that information for regulatory purposes to hopefully protect land that can be protected on the basis of species habitat. And he also led the development of the Endangered and Non-Game Species Program's first wildlife action plan for rare species conservation over the next 10 years. And that plan's been updated since. And some successful examples of his work with that included for bald eagles, increasing them from one nest to a record 59 active pairs, and endangered peregrine falcon populations increasing from 4 nests to a high of 20 nests. And since retiring from that program, he's served as chief biologist of the Conserve Wildlife Foundation and also developed his own consulting company, which is now pursuing independent research and projects on shorebird ecology and conservation and habitat conservation through planning and restoration. And this is what we're going to hear about tonight. And he has been a tireless advocate, and his wife, who is here with us tonight, Mandy, working with the North American All-Bird Conservation Committee, the National Shorebird Council, the executive board of the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network. So Larry has really been active on a hemispheric basis for wildlife and not just New Jersey. And so we are privileged to have him here tonight. Larry, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to the Sierra Club as one of the most influential groups in the state that's achieved a lot of good things. There isn't that many groups in New Jersey that will actually take to that will get in the battle to save land or save species. Most like to do outreach or, research. But Sierra Club has been one of those that actually gets in there and tries to protect things. So I congratulate you on that. So let me just get myself together here now. So tonight I'm going to talk about, it's mostly about Delaware Bay. And so first I'm going to talk about shorebirds and why they need shore stopovers and why horseshoe crabs are so important. Then I'm going to talk about the fisheries agencies, like why did they allow horseshoe crabs on Delaware Bay to be over-harvested in the first place. But then going on, why does the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, which regulates the killing of every marine species that is killed, harvested, why do they have such a miserable record? Because they do. 22 of the 28 species that they manage are either overfished or depleted. And then, but I really want to talk about why horseshoe crabs are vital to ecosystem health. And then finally, what can we do about all of this? So shorebirds are unique. They're special amongst all animals because of the major migrations that they take every year. So red knot is a good example because it, you see in here that, this is hard to talk like that, isn't it? I'm not used to having two screens. So you can see here that the bird really is an Arctic species. And then it migrates down each of the major flyways, the Australasian flyway, the New World flyway, and then the flyway down to Africa. So shorebirds typically see the world from the top down. Red knots are this way. We've tracked them. We've tracked them with these small geolocators. They don't transmit. They just record light, and from the light, you can figure out where the bird was when it recorded it. But now we're using satellite transmitters, and we see these very gigantic, large flights. We had one bird that made a flight that was 7 days long, just continuous flying. And now we're getting very detailed information. Like this is a bird that left Delaware Bay, went up to the Arctic, and in the Arctic we can track its movement while it's there. So Mandy and I went to the Arctic in the early 2000s. We went for about 6 or 7 years trying to figure out where birds were moving and what their basic ecology is. Now we can just basically sit in our living rooms and learn everything we need to know about the Arctic use. So, but the main thing is that the Delaware Bay was home to 1.5 million shorebirds every year. So they were coming from South America, from southern United States, and then they come to Delaware Bay, they would get fat, and then they would use that to go on to the Arctic and use the fat to help them start their egg laying and incubation. Now, the reason they're coming to the bay is because of the massive number of horseshoe crabs. Now, Delaware Bay has the largest horseshoe crab population in the world, and in anywhere that the horseshoe crabs occur, from Florida to New Hampshire, there is nothing like this, nothing like crabs cobbling. This is a big deal, and it's only occurs now in Delaware Bay. This is what it looked. This is a clip taken from an NJN television show about the migration in 1986. So that windrow of eggs right here, oops, this is all eggs. See, there were so many eggs that let me show you this graphic. So it's like this. If you have a certain number of eggs, then all the eggs will stay in the sand because the crabs are digging down about this far into the sand. They're laying their eggs. But when you have a lot of crabs, then the beach fills up with eggs, and then they start coming to the surface. And that's where the birds are eating them. So everything was great until the ASMFC, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, decided to allow a overharvest of the crabs. Now, there's something special in this that, and this is what I found throughout my career, is that we abhor abundance. Like, as soon as there is something abundant, we either think of it as less, like starlings. They're abundant, so we think of them as less. Or we want to make money from it. So all across the country, whenever there's abundance, somebody's in there killing it, harvesting it, doing something to make money from it. And that's what happened here. The crabs were so abundant that eventually the fishers from New England, who already destroyed their ground fish, the codfish, and all their fisheries were collapsing. They needed a new fish to overharvest. But they needed, and so they went after whelk, or conch, and they needed a bait. And so they started coming to Delaware Bay with tractor trailers, taking horseshoe crabs and taking them away to New England. But eventually, the whelk fishery moved down the coast, and everybody was trying to take horseshoe crabs. So in this graph, you could see that the crab harvest was minimal, and these are just estimates. By the time they actually recorded the kill, it was up to 2.5 million a year. So very quickly, things changed on the bay. So the horseshoe crab eggs that I showed you before, that's what it looked like in '86. By the end of the '90s, in the early 2000s, it looked like this. And this only occurred for a very short period of time because the crab population had been cut so low that the main period of breeding was surrounded the lunar, the full moon, new moon. So, you have this many, but it's only for a short period of time. Whereas this, back in the 80s and early 90s, there were so many crabs that they filled up the beach. And then they filled up the beach beneath the surface, and there was all these eggs at the top. So if you're looking at it as a graph, then the eggs would, the beginning of May, the eggs would go up, And then there would be a plateau that lasted all through the month. So it didn't matter when the birds came because there were always eggs on the beach. But after they really destroyed the abundance of horseshoe crabs, then it became a peak. So that if the birds came early or late, then all of a sudden they're screwed too. So this is what the egg densities look like. So this graph here is the harvest. And I really resist using the word harvest when it comes to fisheries because there is no stewardship. They're just killing animals and hoping that the sea will replace them. But it's not like a harvest, like, a farmer harvests something and he plants it, and then he goes out, he nurtures it, and then he goes out and harvests it. Marine fish, it's not that way. It's just take, take, take. So this was the eggs when I was just starting with the Endangered Species Program. I had actually created this survey. I didn't conduct it. It was done by Karen Williams. And see, she was getting eggs that were close to 250,000 eggs per square meter. So that's this big. Then it collapsed down to about 50,000 eggs. That was a study done by Mark Botten and Bob Loveland in 1990 and 91. And then after the big part of the harvest took place, we were down to about 3,000 eggs per square meter. And we're still at that 5 to 10,000 eggs per square meter. So, effectively, we went down from 50 to 100,000 eggs per square meter to 5,000. And that's a world of difference. So right away, we lost the species like red knot, which was very dependent on horseshoe crab eggs. I mean, their numbers have fallen as low as 6,000 on the bay. We started out with over 90,000. So just in the 20 years or so, it's gone down to that. And we know that it's a real decline because we were also surveying birds in Tierra del Fuego, the main wintering area, where the numbers went from about 65,000 overall down to around 10,000. And it's still sort of hovering around that number. So there's no restoration going on. And see, this mirrored what's going on with shorebirds overall. Most of the species are declining, but the species that are declining the fastest, the red knot, the short-billed dowitcher, the semi-palmated sandpiper, ruddy turnstone, they're all among the fastest declining. So when all this was going on, we were working with the agencies trying to turn it around, to stop the harvest, or at least to cut it back, to let the animals recover. But we were also rebuilding beaches. I work with the American Littoral Society, and we were turning beaches that look like this into perfect horseshoe crab spawning beaches. And they were. Like we were able to increase the density of horseshoe crab eggs from about 5,000 or less per square meter up to almost 20,000 without any increase in the number of horseshoe crabs, because we were creating this very optimal habitat and drawing in crabs that were breeding in marginal places. But it wasn't because there were any more crabs. And then we were also doing programs, like this is Return a Favor, which is run by the Wetlands Institute. And they field volunteers going out, turning over crabs that would have died because they were turned over by waves or they were impinged in a bulkhead. And so these volunteers were going out rescuing crabs at night so that they weren't influencing the shorebird use. they recovered over 500,000 crabs. But see, it didn't. So, what was the response of the agency to all this hard work trying to recover? They wanted to restart the female harvest of crabs. So, one of the actions that they agreed to, with all our pressure, was to change the harvest from anything to just males. And so, but they real unhappy about not being able to kill females. So in response to all this management, they wanted to increase the harvest. So it begs the question, what went wrong with this agency? Because not only were they wanted to expand the harvest to females, they were killing almost 1 million for bait. Now they're killing almost 1 million for bait. The blood of horseshoe crabs has a valuable chemical called LAL, which is a biochemical that can detect contaminants in everything medical that goes into your body. So it used to be a rabbit test, which was very cruel and very expensive. And then someone developed this LAL, and all of a sudden, all the companies switched to it. So horseshoe crabs were the sole source of this worldwide important chemical. Then the companies destroyed the Asian horseshoe crabs. So now they're all focusing on the U.S. East Coast. And most of the crabs that they're bleeding are coming from Delaware Bay. They're bleeding over 1 million crabs a year. And they say they're only killing 15%. But independent studies replicating their method is closer to 30%. And a recent study showed that big animals, which are the females, in the way that they bleed them, what they do is they stick them on a spike into their heart, and then they just let the animal bleed out. So it's for 8 minutes. So for a female, they could take up to 50% of the blood. So very substantial mortality. And then there's bycatch, which nothing is being done about. And their estimates were just guesses. But there's substantial bycatch from fisheries that are like clam and scallop dredges that, scrape the bottom, scrape most of the bottom, because there's such a big business for scallops and clams now, and they're overdoing that, and they're moving further and further out from the coast and getting more and more into the horseshoe crabs wintering area. See, horseshoe crabs winter on the Atlantic coast, like they go out to Delaware Bay and they spread out from Atlantic City down to about Chincoteague. And then, in the spawning season, they come back into the bay. So all this dredging, all this trawling creates a lot of bycatch, and nothing's being done about that either. So why is this agency doing this? When we first got into it, we thought, okay, it's about red knots. Now we could see, no, it's about horseshoe crabs. Now we could see it's not about horseshoe crabs. It's about this agency. So the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission regulates or creates the quotas for all the fish that are taken from the Atlantic coast. So what we did was compared it to the Pacific, the counterpart on the Pacific. They have over 120 species that they manage. None of them are overfished except for the ones where the seasons are closed, 4 of them. In the Atlantic States Marine Fish Commission, 22 of the 28 species are overfished or depleted. So this agency has a terrible record of managing. Now, why? Well, the main reason is because the management board, who is composed of politically, oriented people. You have to be appointed, and you have to be approved by the local politicians. So when Governor Corzine recommended me to be on New Jersey's Marine Fish Commission, Jeff Van Drew, who's against the moratorium of horseshoe crabs in New Jersey, killed my appointment. So in other words, these management boards are being really commanded by politicians. They can overrule the scientists. So if the scientist says this stock is overfished, it needs to be closed, which is what they do in the Pacific Coast. The Pacific Coast Council can't overrule the scientists. So if the scientists say this stock is closed, then they have to close it. And it opens again when it's restored. It's a beautiful system. They have a very good scientist doing very good work, and they identify when things are in trouble, and then there's action taken to restore it. They still have problems. They still have climate change. They still have all the difficulties that everybody has to deal with. But our agencies never closes down a stock. Like the ASMFC really came into being because of the success they had with striped bass. And how did they have that success? They closed the season for striped bass until it was recovered. And then it recovered, and then the scientists said it's overfished again, but they didn't close the stock. They did all these fancy manipulations, size limits, take limits, like all these things that you really can't enforce. That's what they did to horseshoe crabs. Now, the other reason is, I think, more important for all of us, which is that estuaries have almost no protection. So an estuary is an ecosystem. And this is the concept of ecosystem management by NOAA and the ASMFC. Now, see, they have this very sort of interesting graphic, but you notice what's missing here is that Chesapeake Bay, Delaware Bay, Long Island Sound, Nantucket Sound, there's no mention of them. And see, that's where all the productivity is happening. So, for example, this is striped bass. Striped bass depend on estuaries. There are estuarine fish that go out to the Atlantic coast. Another example is menhaden. Menhaden lay their eggs at sea, but the eggs come into the estuaries where the young spend the first year of their life. So every fish depends on the estuaries, except there's nobody protecting the productivity of estuaries. It's all being managed for the businesses on the Atlantic coast. So menhaden again. The agency said we're going to do a ecosystem approach to menhaden. So they created a ecological reference point for menhaden, which was meant to be, we're only going to take this much, and then after that, it's going back to the ecosystem. Except what they defined as the ecosystem was striped bass. This is, in reality, this is the ecosystem of menhaden. Everything eats menhaden. And they eat small menhaden, they eat big menhaden. This is a vital fish for Atlantic coast fisheries. So what do they do with the rest of the menhaden? It goes into cat food. It goes into, all omega-3 oils that they could get from other sources. These are gigantic ships that are basically controlling most of the resources that come from estuaries. They come out and they take it, and so that it can't really come back. So you have this like constant drain on the productivity. They're doing the same thing with herring. They're doing the same thing with shad, with eels, with everything that you can catch. Somebody on the Atlantic coast is taking it, so that there's really nothing left for the estuaries. So now I'm going to get back to horseshoe crabs. This is all just a primer to show you what's happening to horseshoe crabs. So horseshoe crabs, it's been known since the 70s that horseshoe crab eggs were going into every species on Delaware Bay. So either the fish were eating them directly, like most of the forage fish were eating the eggs. Most of the forage fish are eating the young that hatch from the eggs. But there's big fish were eating the eggs as well. Like fishermen would talk about how they could catch weak fish right off the beach because they were coming in and eating the eggs as they were coming off the beach. So this is what that looks like. So these are hatched horseshoe crab eggs right here. And here you can just see the minnows like coming in to feed on those eggs. So this is at 5,000 eggs per square meter. Can you imagine how many fish were supported by 100,000 eggs per square meter? See, that's the point. Most of what the horseshoe crab was making was going into the ecosystem. It's a flagship, it's a keystone species that all the other species depend on it. You remove it, then the ecosystem collapses. And see, that's exactly what happened on the bay. This is weak fish landings. You see the weak fish collapsed exactly at the same time that the horseshoe crabs were over-harvested. So where here they were taking somewhere around 3 to 4 million pounds of weak fish a year from Delaware Bay, now it's down to like 40,000 pounds. So the ecosystem productivity collapsed, then the fishery collapsed. And see, this is the outcome. This is Fortescue, the docks at Fortescue. Most of the marinas now in Delaware Bay are empty, or they're already out of business because the recreational fishery collapsed. So in other words, what happened was the bay is a fountain of resources. The bay itself right now is better protected than it's ever been. There's no more salt hay farms destroying marsh and diking it and keeping the water out. The bay is more productive now than it's ever been, but it doesn't have a recreational fishery. And that's because the agencies have moved the natural wealth from the people that live in the place to the corporations out on the Atlantic coast. I mean, that's a familiar story, right? Corporations taking, and the rest of us have to sort of, get dollar store jobs and all that stuff. Like, that's what's happening to natural resources. So instead of, having an abundant resource where we have, we once had a world-class stopover where people were coming from around the world to see it. Now it's just one of many stopovers. We once had 1.5 million shorebirds. Now we have about 300,000 shorebirds. Still a lot of birds, but it's not a world spectacle. There were small boat fishermen, like fishermen that could put out gill nets and get fish and take them to local restaurants and sell them locally. And like in San Francisco, my son owns a restaurant, and my other son is a sort of dabble in commercial fisher. Like he has several licenses. And so what happens in San Francisco Bay is that most of the fish are going to small boat fishermen, and they're selling it to restaurants in San Francisco, and they're getting a lot of money out of it. So in other words, the resource isn't being transported out to multinational corporations. It's benefiting the people who live in the area. And then, there was and having head boats that actually where there's lots of people and people are making money. Fortescue used to call it
Do they still have the Grunion Run?
the West Coast.
Grunion or something like that?
Yeah, that's actually lost too, because for the obvious reasons. Okay, so I'm going to just say, what can we do? The first is stop the killing of horseshoe crabs for bait. There's no need for it. Whelk and eels are the main reasons why they're taking crabs for bait, and both are declining stocks. The eel was recommended for federal listing not long ago, so there's no need to kill bait, and that we should be following the course that the Western Council does, which is close the season, stop the killing, let it recover. And then when it comes back, we can start talking about killing again. And I got to tell you, I was on the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission committee that decided these quotas. So I was part of it for the time. I thought we were all working together towards recovery. And then when they recommended the female harvest, I got out of it. But what I recognize in retrospect is that they have these scientists, doing these really complicated statistical models that nobody understands except them, but they always come out in favor of killing whatever it is. So they never do a model that comes out and says, we need to stop the killing. It's always some variation of continuing the killing. So that's the first thing, just stop the killing. Stop the killing of crabs for blood. There's a synthetic now. It's approved by the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. It's approved in the European Pharmacopoeia. It's cheaper. It's more efficacious than the LAL. There's no reason to use crab blood anymore because there's a synthetic. But see, we need to act on this because the pharmaceutical companies have to switch over to the synthetic, which it could take years. And the companies that are taking blood, they're not like, real nice, flowery pharmaceutical companies. These are cutthroats. Like we went to court against the main one, Charles River in South Carolina. And so we got in discovery, could see all the internal stuff going on. And then we had to, after the case was over, we had to turn all the materials back in again. So I can't share them. But I could tell you, these people are only about making money. So we have a synthetic, we don't need to do it. And even if crabs have to be bled, they don't have to kill them. They could take less blood per crab. They could take better care of the crabs when they're coming in, when they're going out. What they're doing now is they're just treating as though the crab is worthless. Like they treat them just like the bait people do. They're treating them as though they're worthless, completely ignoring the ecosystem value of the animal. And then finally, join the Horseshoe Crab Recovery Coalition. We formed this group, David Mizrahi and I from New Jersey Audubon, started this several years ago. And now we have over 50 different groups in the coalition. I think it's remarkable because I came from State Fish and Wildlife Agency, and I know that there's this dividing line between, people who want to conserve wildlife and people who, care about the welfare of animals, humane society, that sort of thing. Like the fish and game agencies want that stark line because, the other side is against hunting. But what we've done is weave together everybody. It's Humane Society, it's Physicians for Responsible Medicine, it's National Wildlife Federation, National Audubon, Eli Lilly, the drug company. So it's a real wide net of conservation and animal rights interest working on this together. And, you know, the effectiveness of it is with this female harvest. The agencies thought they were going to sneak that through. But first of all, Earth Justice was on the job, and they submitted a sort of counter-scientific understanding to the ASMFC. But the Horseshoe Crab Recovery Coalition created over 39,000 comments on this, and they withdrew it. And I am almost certain they withdrew it because of that public outcry. And then, you know, you can do things like return a favor. It's a really great experience. You get to actually save an animal's life. I find that really rewarding. And then we have a stewardship program on Delaware Bay that's run by Conserve Wildlife Foundation. You can become a steward. So we have people at each of the beaches that are, you know, educating visitors as to why there's restrictions and so on. And then the Citizens United to Protect the Morris River, a South Jersey group, has a volunteer group that cooks dinners for the science team during the month of May. So we have a science team that comes from around the world to work on capturing shorebirds, to ban them and put on various, you know, take samples, put on devices. And you can see the group here, it gets large. So they have to eat every night. And so these people come and they make dinners for us. And these are really great dinners. So, and that's all volunteer too. And then, you know, for people who don't get close to the beach, but they want to see what's going on, the National Zoo now has a Delaware Bay exhibit in their bird house. There's three themes. The one is passerines, neotropical passerines migrating from North to South America. There's another section on the prairie pothole, ducks, and then there's a third section on Delaware Bay. And these are great places. You could walk in, there's birds. We captured birds for the exhibit. So it's a lot of fun. This is Manny and I's grandchildren. So thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Can you take questions
Sure.
now?
Yep. Yes.
Now, there's a nickname, bunkerfish. What's the real name for bunkerfish?
Menhaden.
How do you pronounce that word?
Menhaden?
Yeah, menhaden?
It's Menhaden. Yeah. Yes.
When you're talking about like closing season on certain animals, what's the amount of time that they would need for recovery from where we are right now?
So, like, you know, if you're talking about a fish, like the professional job is to monitor it when it dips below that optimal level where, see, fish, the bigger a fish gets, the more productive it gets. So you want as many big fish as you can. So for fish, you want to manage a population that has a good mix of old fish with young fish. When it dips below that, then you close the season to bring it back up. It takes only a few years. Like right now, the salmon fishery is closed in California. That's a huge fishery. But see, it'll probably only stay closed for a year, maybe 2 years, and then they'll reopen it again. And because all the fish stocks are in good condition, when you have one fish that goes out, there's still all the other fish. But see, what happens here is like what's happening with stripers right now. The scientists said it should be shut down, but they didn't. Instead, what they did was alter the seasons and change the size limits and the bag limits and all that stuff, which can't be enforced or very difficult to enforce. And what they're doing is they're not just, you got a good population and then it drops down to here, and so you just close it and bring it back. They're letting it go all the way down till it's just above having to list it. See, it's just a bad way of doing business. Yep.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, I'm butting in here, but it really depends on how long it takes the animal to reach sexual maturity. Like horseshoe crabs take 10 years. So that's kind of a long time. So to get a lot of crabs to that breeding age where they're, laying lots of eggs every year and more recruiting, it's going to take maybe a decade, maybe a little less, but a lot of fish are in the same boat, right? They take, the conch, for example, are more like that. I forget which, they're R and K strategists, right? Long time to sexual maturity, big reproductive output. Then think like blue claw crabs, I think, reach sexual maturity in a year or two.
In the
So
first year.
yeah, it's very different, and if you damage them, they're quicker to respond to management. But most fish are not, and I think the marine fisheries folks, they know this, but they're really maximizing economic gain over long-term productivity.
Yeah, it's the problem for them, for the scientists, is like I was in the room. The horseshoe crab population is falling like a rock. We said there should be a moratorium, and the horseshoe crab guy said board would never accept a moratorium. So then instead they propose a half measure because they know that the board will accept that. So then it just keeps getting worse. Half measures, half measures. Yes.
Is there a specific petition you're signing to lobby the pharmaceutical companies?
Yes. So go to the Horseshoe Crab Recovery website. It's hscrabrecovery.org. But just put in Horseshoe Crab Recovery. And we have it's an active website. So whenever there's something that you can join into, it's right up on the front page of actions. The Center for Center for Biological Diversity just submitted a petition to list the horseshoe crab with NOAA, and they're fielding comments right now. Another group, Physicians for Responsible Medicine, has been fielding comments to go to the FDA. But if you go to the Horseshoe Crab Recovery Coalition, you can find about all that. Yes, Stan.
When you say the word list, what does that mean?
To federally list it as threatened. So the idea, there's a reasonable case to list the animal, to give it a threatened status, like the red knot is threatened. But it's also a bit of a ploy because, see, what we're arguing to the medical companies is all the world's supply for LAL that's used to introduce every new drug, to test everything that's going into your body, is depending on one place, Delaware Bay. Now, Delaware Bay is one of the top oil transport ports in the country. And not only do they have the volume, but they have to lighter the boats to get them up the channel. So they're doing a lot of moving of crude from one boat to another at the mouth of the bay. And so there's the chance of a spill is like really great. So one oil spill, that's all it would take to knock out all the horseshoe crabs because crude sinks and then it just moves in and out with the tide. And that's where the crabs are at the bottom. So our world's supply for a vital biochemicals depending on a species that we're now trying to list, just as a wake-up call that I don't think we'll get the listing, or we may, but if the NOAA says, okay, let's have the agencies review it, then all the pharmaceutical companies are going to know that they're relying on a species that could be listed. And then that changes everything. Yes.
How do you recommend young people or people in general get directly involved with conservation efforts?
So are we talking about college students? I think, it's really hard to do this. My father was a carpenter. I had to work my way through school, but back then that was easy compared to now. And I know that everybody needs jobs that help them pay. But I think the most important thing you can do is get experience. Whatever way you can get experience, just get experience. And I wouldn't limit yourself to any specific species, or just get in there and get experience and let opportunity take you from one thing to the next. That's all I could say. I think get educated, that's for sure. Get a master's degree, at least, because master's degrees, they don't open up doors for you, but they do teach you how to start a project and finish it. So, and that's a valuable skill when you're in agencies. I think this is my wife, Mandy Dye, who was a biologist with New Jersey Fish and Wildlife and has done all the things that I have done. We've done them together.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I would, I'd just say to you that it's really hard to get through school and get through debt-free, if you can even get through debt-free, and then have time to do other things. But if you can volunteer, someone on campus, some professors doing some research that you think is very cool, say, hey, listen, I'll volunteer to enter your data for you. Then you get to know them, and they get to know you. You apply for a job, that's a good reference. You know what I mean? Like a known quantity, you're reliable, you're willing to enter data, you're willing to do it on your own dime, or maybe you can get involved in their research directly. Like it's, getting a paid job in this profession is always tough, but there are places will offer you housing, for a minimal salary. You just go travel somewhere, you spend a few months doing work with that group. But volunteering, if you can do it, or get to know professors at other universities, that is always a good way to get your foot in the door.
Or with the agencies.
With who?
Volunteering with agencies.
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah. Then you get to see the ugly political side of things. But, it's always good to have that diversity of experience anyway.
Thank you.
Yes.
My town owns an island where we know horseshoe crabs breed, and we're trying to protect it from recreational boaters. So I'm wondering if you have any recommendations for resources for protection of breeding grounds.
Do you have volunteers with your organization? No. No. See, I think the problem here in northern part of the state, Long Island, is that there's just so many people everywhere that the only, to ask an agency to protect isn't going to happen because they don't have enough people to do stuff like that. I think the only way that you can be sure is to have stewardship. So have people out there On the weekends, probably. It's probably not during the week. I don't know. I don't know the circumstance, but I mean, I don't know the circumstance in your place, but I know the circumstance. You know, every shoal, every place you go, there's boats or people, and I don't think there's any way out of it except to have a volunteer program. You know, it could happen easily because people love to protect horseshoe crabs.
Do you have one that's like a model?
Yes, we do. So you can contact me afterwards.
What do boats do to harm because they're mostly at high tide? What's the function of the harm?
Well, see, we're mostly concerned about the birds and the boats, you know, because if boats land, then birds can't use it or won't use it at all.
So not horseshoe crabs, thank you.
But it depends on the circumstance. If the crab spawn is light and you only have a crab here or a crab there, then I imagine they're just displacing the crab spawning. I don't know. Oh, yeah.
Why is there such a diversity between the West Coast agency or organization and the East Coast? Why wouldn't they operate the same way?
Because the Magnuson-Stevens Act. So in 1996, I think that's when it was, they, within that act, it created the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission independently from the other marine councils. And the idea was if we can get the fishermen to be involved, then they have the most interest in protecting the stock. But see, and in a way that's true, because that's why the main fishery for lobsters work, because the lobstermen are the ones who are creating the rules and enforcing them. But see, what quickly happened with the commission is it's not fishermen on that board. It's representatives of the docks, the canneries, the big ships. It's the investor-driven company part of the industry. And so they're on it. Plus, they have to be approved by politicians who are taking money from those corporations. And really, what fisherman has the time to go to weeks of meetings in usually expensive places because they all like to, you know, spend freely. Their meetings are, you know, splendid affairs, and they have balls and all that stuff. So, you know, what small boat fisherman could pay for that? You know, so it just naturally shifts towards the people who are being paid to do it, and that's the corporations. So it was an experiment that failed.
Just want to thank you for coming and make an announcement before everybody leaves, which there are petitions at the back of the room you can take a look at, scan the QR codes to help support the Red Knots. And also, as an encouragement to the gentlemen out here, there are great websites to look for internships and positions in conservation, and you may find things for whether it's for a summer or a semester or a year. So I'd encourage you to look at those sources. And Kim, that in case you may find some help, either from Clean Ocean Action, which we are fortunate tonight to have Kaylee D. Pasquale here from Clean Ocean Action, and also the American Littoral Society and Captain L there, that you may find some help and tips for protecting those breeding grounds.
Photograph of you standing in front of it with your name.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to Larry Niles for joining us.
Let me see.
Larry, you have me totally depressed. It was an excellent job.